Well, let me introduce you to our next speaker, Nikki Stones, former head of marketing, energy and natural resources at KPMG UK, member of the board of trustees of Concern Worldwide, an aid and humanitarian agency, and now she's vice president marketing at CleanHub. CleanHub just got a 6.4 million funding this year for its plastic waste recovery technology. They want to completely revolutionize the way how waste management works. And they want to tackle the problem that a circular economy not always works for everyone and that we have to face challenges in here. So CleanHub, and I think Nikki's going to tell you all about it in a minute, but they built a technology to actually track and trace their entire logistics chain for collecting ocean plastic to overcome, and that's a big thing, the fundamental trust issues that come with that and that come with collecting ocean plastics. So Nikki will talk about how we can move to a post-waste world. Welcome, Nikki Stones.
Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here today to, talk to you about how we can move beyond waste and towards solving the plastic problem. So our core belief at CleanHub is that life is best lived on a clean planet, a statement I'm sure we can all agree with. But unfortunately, our reality is very different. We are in the midst of a global waste crisis. How can it be that despite our universal desire for a clean world, 11 million tons of plastic still enter our oceans every year? And so much waste is openly burned that it's having a direct and clear impact on climate change. Earlier this year, I visited Sierra Leone in West Africa for the first time. And when you actually first land in Sierra Leone, you then have to get a boat across the mouth of the river to reach Freetown. And despite my travel-weary state, one of the first things that struck me was the sheer amount of plastic waste floating on the surface of the water. But as I spent time in the city, the reason for that became abundantly clear. There is no effective waste management in Sierra Leone. Freetown itself is a coastal city, and it's surrounded by hills, green, lush, beautiful hills. And I went to a village on the top of one of those hills to speak to the chief and ask him how it is that they manage their waste. And what he told me is that because there's no collection, they have no choice but to either burn it or to throw it in the waterways, where it makes its way downstream and effectively becomes somebody else's problem. And as you go further down the hillside, you can clearly see where the waste is accumulating, and in some cases, the water is just but a trickle. Now, the locals are always working, of course, to try and clear that up, but in so doing, the waste then goes further downstream, and it makes its way into the river that I'd crossed just days before, and of course, ultimately, the ocean. Now, there is some waste collection in Sierra Leone, or in Freetown itself, I should say, right in the center of the city. But all of that waste is then taken to one of two huge landfills, and they're worryingly close to where people are living and working. And this is one I drove past, and you can see it's just constantly emitting this thick black smoke into the atmosphere. And there's all these people that are just walking through the waste, scavenging through it, trying to find anything they can of value. Now, this isn't a problem that's unique just to Sierra Leone. More than 2 billion people worldwide don't have access to proper waste management. And actually, only 9% of plastic is recycled globally. We actually fare a bit better in the EU. It's about 30%. In the US, which is one of the biggest producers of plastic, it's only 5%. So this is definitely not a global south problem. So now we understand the problem a bit more. What are the solutions? Actually, no, I'm going to start with the problems. Why is recycling so difficult still, despite all the technology and advancements that we have today? Well, one major issue is that a lot of plastic still can't technically be recycled. And what I'm talking about here is multi-layer plastic. So if you think about the toothpaste tube you used to clean your teeth this morning, that's made of aluminium, and that's designed to keep the product protected. Great. There's then a thin layer of plastic over the top, so it can be branded. Products have to stand out on the shelf. We need to be able to tell one apart from the other. But the problem is that those two materials can't be taken apart in the recycling process. And actually, the same is true of many other everyday items that we use and consume. Crisp packets, a Ben & Jerry's carton, so many things that we use all the time. Another problem is economics. It is still cheaper to use virgin material than it is recycled. And we live in a capitalist society, so a lot of companies are still going to go for the cheaper option, whatever the environmental impact. And then in some cases, there's logistical hurdles. So in really remote regions, even if a material can be recycled technically, so take a plastic bottle, a plastic water bottle, really easy to be recycled, it might not make financial sense to do so. And Sierra Leone is a really good example of this because there's no recycling facilities at all in country. So actually that plastic water bottle would have to be transported to neighbouring Guinea to then be processed, to be turned into something else, and then sent back into the circular economy. And it just doesn't make financial sense. So it's burnt or it's dumped. Now we can get on to the solutions. So how is it then that we can move to a more sustainable future? Well, it starts with design. We need to design for a circular economy. We need to improve economics of scale for recycling. And we need to give all waste value. So let's look at each one of those in a bit more detail. Designing for a circular economy, products must be created with end of life in mind. If my product is not designed that way, that it's going to be reused for something else, it never will be. So we have to be thinking about it at the beginning. We also need to think about how we can extend the life cycle of products for as much as possible. We need to choose the right materials, and we need to think about the resources used in the production. We also need to make it easy to repair and to upgrade. Here's a few examples of some companies that are doing this already. So IKEA now offers spare parts and fittings to extend the life cycle of their products. And they also sell pre-owned furniture in store. Nudie Jeans encourage their customers to take their jeans back for repair, or when they're finished with them, take them back so the material can be used for future designs. And Patagonia allows consumers to trade in and buy used Patagonia wear. If we're truly to see a circular economy, then we need to bring costs down and quality up. The demand has to be there for the recycled materials. And that means transforming the waste materials into something useful on a much, much larger scale. And lastly, we need to give all waste value. The problem with waste is it's not valuable. We throw something away because it's no longer useful to us. But if I could click my fingers and say every single piece of plastic waste around the world was now worth €5, do you think we'd still have a plastic problem? Of course not. So we need to give it that value and so create the incentives for it to be collected. Now, the first two I mentioned, equally important, but they take time and they take innovation. Giving waste value is something we can do right now, today. And that's what we're doing at CleanHub. So let me tell you a bit about it. Basically, at CleanHub, we help brands to reduce plastic and collect more than they use. Of course, it always starts with reduction. And 40% of the plastic that is produced today is packaging, used once and then thrown away. And it's worth just thinking about, why is it that we love plastic so much as society? And it might seem counterintuitive to hear me say this, but it is actually quite a remarkable material. It's cheap, it's malleable, it's waterproof, it's durable. It lasts anything from between 450 years to forever. And of course, that's the problem. But it isn't just a case of all plastic bad, everything else good. Simply by swapping from multi-layer plastic, for example, to monomaterial plastic, so a single material plastic, can dramatically increase the chance of it being able to be reused. And even when we think about other materials, paper is great, of course, but it can't be used for liquid. And even glass, it has to be heated to 3,500 degrees centigrade to be able to be molded and shaped into whatever it's going to be used. And that's suddenly got a really bad plastic footprint, a carbon footprint. So what we do at CleanHub is help brands to navigate this. Packaging is hugely complex, and reducing it even more so. So we offer assessments to brands to help them understand the environmental impact of their packaging today, and then the steps they can take to improve it. Once brands have then reduced what they can then choose to fund plastic recovery in high leakage locations in India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Africa, to balance out what's left of their plastic footprint, or to collect more than they use in the first place. 37% of the brands that partner with CleanHub are actually completely plastic-free. But what all of these brands have in common is that they understand that consumers increasingly want to use their spending power for good and want to buy from brands that share their values. But absolutely critical to this partnership is exactly what we were talking about before. It's the trust and transparency. A brand has to have confidence that if they're funding this plastic recovery, particularly in some locations that are far away, it's really happening, that they're having the impact that they believe they have, so they can communicate about it. So CleanHub has built technology which tracks the collection from the beginning, from when it's first collected, all the way through to disposal, bringing the full transparency to that process. And we provide brands with real-time evidence of their impact. Let's have a look at how this works on the ground. So we partner with local waste managers, and we pay them to collect waste, all waste, non-recyclable and recyclable. We're giving that waste value, and we're creating the incentives for it to be collected in the first place. Collection can be done door to door, or from beaches, or from rivers. We always prefer door-to-door because you're stopping it from getting into nature in the first place. And it's also much more efficient to collect 2 bags versus lots of individual pieces of rubbish scattered on a beach. And then the collectors can register a collection simply by scanning a QR code and then taking a photo of the bag of waste that they've collected using the phones they have in their pockets. Machine learning is then able to predict what the bag is made up of and the approximate weight and density of that bag. It's then sent for sorting, and it's split between plastic waste and non-plastic waste. And if the weight of a bag or bale doesn't match what's been input, then workers can take lots more photos from different angles, and then machine learning will compare the images and weights and search for discrepancies. And then lastly, it's sent for processing. So if it can be recycled, it is. And if it's non-recyclable, then it's sent to a co-processor where it can be used for energy. This isn't the perfect solution, but it's the best that exists today. And it's better than the alternative source. Effectively, it replaces coal in that process. So it lowers the carbon footprint of that entire process. We also integrate computer vision and object detection into our app so that we can see if there's any compliance violations, such as workers not wearing the right footwear or gloves, so that we can educate them on how to actually do the collection safely. And our technology has been verified by TÜV Süd according to ISO standards. A really good real-world example of where we've done this is in Chemnad, a coastal village in South India, which is our biggest deployment yet. So we've recently connected 13,000 households and 700 businesses to proper waste management for the first time. Now, before CleanHub was there was some collection. It's run by a self-help group of 38 women, and there was about 20 to 30% participation in the village in the scheme. These women would go and do the collections every day, and at the end of each day, they had to sit down with a pen and paper and track everything that they'd done so that they could report it to the local governments. We've now digitalized that entire process, saving those women the hour a day, which is great. But also, we now have 80% participation in the village. And a lot of these women, and this is true in a lot of the places we work, didn't even own smartphones before. So they now all have a smartphone. They're all using our app. They're being upskilled. And it was really important for us when we're building the app and when we're doing our user testing to make sure it's really intuitive. Some of the people we're working with, the illiteracy levels can really vary in locations. So it had to be really simple to use. And all of these ladies are now using it. And because we're getting all of this data, that's now what they use to report to the local government. So hopefully we're going to be expanding this scheme much more broadly in the state. But also we can spot those violations, exactly like I said to you before. So we've provided these ladies with proper shoes, so they're not wearing sandals anymore, with gloves, with aprons, so that they're nicely protected. And we can see then if they're using those or not. And if they're not, then we can educate them on why it is so important. And this leads on to another really important point. Environmental impact and social change go hand in hand. Waste pickers have been marginalized by society for centuries, and they're often amongst the lowest paid. And it's been really important to us at CleanHub to make sure that we can improve livelihoods and improve and provide dignified jobs for these people. We make sure that there's fair wages. We upskill workers, so getting them to be able to use technology for the first time, providing them with the smartphones, and improve working conditions. I've visited some of the places, like in Sierra Leone, when these things aren't in place, and believe me, it's not anywhere any one of us would want to work. But I recently went to our material recovery facility in India, and it's clean. It's light. There's no unpleasant smell. There's areas where people can relax in their lunch breaks. It's a nice working environment. And we conduct social audits on a regular basis with the waste managers on the ground that we're working with to make sure that they're complying with standards that we would all feel are acceptable at a global level. These ladies that you can see here are waste collectors on Konad Beach in Kerala in South India. Some of them are earning their own money for the first time, so they no longer have to ask their husbands if they want to buy something for themselves or the kids. And you can see by their faces, this makes them very happy. Need to get closer to here for this to work, I think. And these fishermen in Indonesia got so fed up of finding plastic waste when they were out doing their work every day that they decided to start collecting it. And they're now earning extra income and have improved their livelihoods. Another important stakeholder in plastic pollution, of course, is all of us, the consumer, the individual. It can often seem overwhelming to know what could I do in the face of such a huge challenge? Well, the good news is there are some things we can do. Firstly, separate your trash. Not to be underestimated. If we separate our trash properly, there's a much greater chance that your rubbish will be used for something else. If we put something in the wrong bag, it can mean the entire batch gets dismissed at the recycling facility, because still, despite of technological advancements, etc., the machines can't tell the difference, or can't sort of take one thing out and then let the rest of it be processed. So the whole bag goes to waste. We need to avoid unnecessary single-use plastic. You know what they always say, at the end of the day, the most sustainable product is the one you didn't buy. Something I always try and remember myself, but it's not always easy, I know. And finally, support responsible brands. There's a lot of brands out there that are having a real, genuine impact, that are making a real difference. We've just made that easier for you by launching a brand directory where you can search and buy for brands that are taking verified action on plastic pollution. You can find it on the CleanHub website. CleanHub so far has collected more than 7 million kgs of waste. As consumers, you can all support our mission for a clean planet by buying from the brands committed to real action. But in your day jobs, also think about how you can design with end in mind. What are the small changes we can all make that's going to have an impact? If we come together, then together we can solve waste. Thank you. I'll wait for him.
Thank you. Also, another inspiring talk. Should we have a seat?
Yes, let me get
Water?
some water.
All right, so if you have any questions, just hand them in via the QR code again, and we will ask them in a minute. And let me see if there's already a question. Yes, there is. So let me ask you the first question from the audience. I do understand you do the collection, but what do you do if there is no waste factory? Are you building these factories, or is it just an app?
Yeah,
oh,
no,
that's
it's
harsh.
a really good.
Just an
yeah,
app.
just an app. Yeah,
It's not just an app.
no, it's a really good question. I mean, basically, so we work in. Well, let me start again. There's a lot of pollution hotspots around the world. You know, this is certainly not. We're never going to run out. Certainly in the next however many years of somewhere where we can actually work. But actually, at the moment, we're not working in places like Sierra Leone, where there's actually nothing in place. We're doing, there's a couple of other small projects that we're working on there, where we've got a waste entrepreneur on the ground that's looking to turn waste into building blocks, so it can be used to create buildings for the slums there. And we're looking at how we can support that. But we're not doing it on the scale we're doing it in India, where it doesn't yet exist. As I say, it's such a huge problem. There's so many pollution hotspots that actually we're starting where there's got to be some desire for change. There's got to be the opportunity for us to work with waste entrepreneurs on the ground so that we can put the facilities in place together, and then it can be fully processed. At the moment, if that doesn't exist, then that would mean collecting the waste and then having to transport it somewhere else. The only exception for that would actually be in the Andaman Islands in India. So we have done projects there, and for the first time, we've actually collected waste off the island. They've never had any waste recovery, and I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of the Andamans, but they are the idyllic, sort of palm tree islands that we would all love to visit on holiday. But they've had no waste management at all. So we've started collecting it there, but then we transport it to a facility in India, and that journey's not too far. But in some places, these things need to be put in place first. So that's where we're focusing at the moment.
And if you say they don't have waste management there, why do you think that is? Because is it like the government that they don't care, or I mean, why wouldn't you have waste management? Just it's too expensive, or?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you think about somewhere like Sierra Leone, for example, I mean, it's not in that far distant past that they were in a civil war. So they've got huge humanitarian problems. There's challenges within the government. There isn't a huge amount of, they're suffering economically. And so waste management, although it's really important, it's not as important as, maternity deaths and some of the other challenges that are facing Sierra Leone right now. And that will sometimes be the problem. I think it's also interesting, though, when you think about the US. I mean, as I mentioned, they're only recycling 5% of their plastic waste, which I still find insane. There's a quote from Donald Trump from a few years ago saying that he has bigger things to worry about than plastic straws. So, wow. there's obviously change needed at government level, and that has to be there as well for this to happen.
Right. Another question from the audience, and I think that's quite interesting. How are the waste collectors paid? Is it per bag, per hour? And where does the money come from?
Yeah, so basically, they're paid as a day rate, so they get a regular salary. We pay them. I think in Europe we're often used to being paid monthly, and actually you pay much more frequently in India and in some of the global south because they need the money on a more regular basis. They have a day rate. They're paid weekly. Basically, the money comes from, the way we're sort of working is we're effectively linking brands that want to take action on plastic pollution with the waste collectors on the ground. And then you can think of us as sort of the connector that does that. So the brands that want to be taking the action on plastic pollution are then funding the plastic recovery. And that's where the money comes from.
Okay. So is it also, because I think that's quite interesting, you said that it's mostly brands who are quite good with plastics. Do you also work together with brands that are bad in that way?
Yeah.
And they're just oh yeah, we do something like that, and then it's not that bad.
No, I mean, unfortunately, none of the brands that would initially come to mind of the big giants have called us anytime recently.
Well, maybe they do.
Maybe
after today.
They will after today. Yeah, I saw today actually. It was on the BBC News today. They were saying that the New York government is now suing Pepsi because of plastic pollution in the river in New York, in the Buffalo River, because they'd done a survey of all the waste that had been collected, and Pepsi products were made up 17%, so they're being sued. So I think there's more of this type of action that's coming. It does tend to be brands that are, sort of forward-thinking brands that understand, look, this is the way the world is moving. This is actually increasingly what consumers are looking for. They want brands to be taking action, verified action. We need to make sure it is verified, and it's the brands that understand that. There's a lot that should be doing something that aren't.
Okay. And another question, if CleanHub and everyone is working towards common goals, it obviously, and you mentioned that, it needs a cooperation of governments.
Yes.
Working together with governments is, I guess, the ideal way. But what do you think, what would be an ideal global governance model somehow?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, actually, because as we speak, there's the latest talks are happening in Nairobi this week with the goal of actually having the first global plastic treaty. And there's countries all around the world that are there discussing this, to sort of think of the same as sort of, the big agreements at COP in Paris, a few years ago on climate change. They're trying to do the same thing now for plastic. A lot of it focused about, how can we stop the flow? And then what is it we need to do with everything that's there? And of course, the waste management that's needed. So that is exactly what's needed. There's obviously also other good initiatives happening with governments. That can be anything from banning single-use items. In Germany recently, glitter's been banned. But it's amazing. You don't think of that as being plastic, but actually, it is. And in the UK, packaging for fast food. That's been banned recently as well, plastic packaging. So these initiatives are happening, but we do need that. We need that global treaty that has to, we're all sort of supporting that and pinning some hopes on that as well. The problem, of course, with those things, though, is they do take time. And then sometimes, the goal is in 20 years' time. And we do need to act now.
That's not easy. If
it's
you
not
tell
easy.
people you get the results in 20 years, they're like...
Exactly. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Exactly. And when you think about when there's you can look at the graphs of plastic production is just going one way at the moment, and that's that way. So, yeah, we need to be acting sooner than that.
Yeah. Another question: what is the business model of CleanHub, and how do you find the funds for incentives and wages?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, it's basically it's brands. So we partner with brands, so consumer-facing brands that want to take action on plastic pollution, and that's where the funding comes from, effectively. And for the benefits of brands, so brands then fund the recovery, but then actually, we've got a whole sort of product suite that they also get as well, right? So they, as I said, everything's tracked. They get real-time digital evidence. They get an impact report. They can use our trust badge. They get a lot of content from us. They get communication support. So there's a lot of things on top of it as well. It can be very difficult for companies. Some companies don't even want to mention they're using plastic for fear of backlash. Others are terrified of greenwashing. And I think obviously because we've got the technology in and it's fully verified, that there's some confidence. But people are scared. And the greenwashing one is an interesting one because I think, of course, we need to call out brands that are actually greenwashing. It's 100%. It happens a lot, and we need to call it out. But actually, I do empathise with a lot of brands. Some brands are starting to try and do the right thing. They've got things in place. These things are a journey. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yes.
And
also support the transformation.
Support the transformation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the critical piece here. But brands can often be understandably apprehensive about communicating, so then we'll help them with all of that as well. So they get that as part of their package, effectively.
So another question I find that quite interesting is, when designing CleanHub's business model, how did you calculate the carbon footprint or impact of trash that is not recycled but used for energy?
Yes, so we've got. If my CEO was here, he could answer this question far better than I can. But they did a lot of analysis on this before. Whoever answered that question, send it to me on LinkedIn, and I'll put you in touch with Joel, and he'll be able to answer that much better than I can. I know it was a very thorough process in order to calculate it, but yeah, it was before my time.
All right, I just jumped here. Let me go back, and I think you kind of answered it earlier, but is CleanHub trying to work with governments to install laws? Is it kind of like the typical lobbying, or how do you do that?
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, for example, our co-CEO, Louis, has been over in Nairobi this week as well, while all of these talks are happening. So, we're involved in a lot of the conversations that are happening there, and there's a sort of committee of companies that are looking to act on plastic pollution. I mean, I think the key thing on plastic pollution is, let's be clear, there isn't a silver bullet. We need lots of different solutions right now. There's plastic that's already in nature that has to be dealt with. We've got to stop it getting in nature in the first place, and we need to find alternative materials. So there's the whole, we really need to work together for this to be successful. And we're part of quite a lot of groups where we discuss what needs to happen here, and then lobbying, at the EU government levels and things like that as well. And then, as I say, in things like Nairobi.
Another interesting question, and that's something I never thought of it myself somehow, like when I actually heard about the project, but scientists have found hundreds of toxic substances in samples of recycled plastic. These compounds can pose a risk to consumers. How do you cope with that? Yeah,
it's a really interesting one with this, and I think, putting that recycled plastic aside for 1 second, I think also the microplastics, they're being found everywhere, now. It's sort of in the placenta, in Mount Everest, in clouds, there's all of these things everywhere. I think in this, the key thing is we're working with the systems that exist today, but there has to be innovation and there has to be advancement in the recycling capabilities. This is what I was going back to before. We've got to be investing. Governments have to be investing. We need to be improving this because actually, if we're really going to have the circular economy, exactly like I was saying earlier, then we need the quality of recycling has to be improved, and we need to be able to be doing it on a much larger scale. So, yeah, as I say, at the moment we're working with the systems that exist today, but then lobbying for change, and we're talking to a lot of the big recyclers as well. We're working with Alba. There's different recycling companies that we're working with to look at how things can be improved.
And another question, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but do you have partnerships with other companies who are aiming to clean the oceans from plastic? But what I understood is that you are cleaning it with waste collectors, so you're not actually building a ship to collect ocean plastics, right?
Yeah. So I mean, our mantra really is that ocean plastic is solved on the land, not the sea. We need to stop it from getting in there in the first place. A lot of the plastic that's in the sea is now sunk to the bottom, right? A lot of it doesn't just float on the top, so it can be picked up. A lot has gone. We've got no idea, in all honesty, how much is down there. And I think we've partnered with people with companies that have got river barriers in place. So then there's different ways of stopping it from getting to the ocean. And of course, there's companies that are looking to get the plastic that's in the ocean out. With all of these things, I mean, they face scrutiny too, because then there's a risk that harms the wildlife that's already in the ocean. I don't know if anyone here has seen the latest David Attenborough Planet 3, which has just been released in the UK, but they just showed that actually now there's a lot of the wildlife is starting to live on old fishing nets and things like that as well. It's evolving so that it can actually, which is mind-blowingly bad, really, but the wildlife adapts. And actually, so we have to be careful, when we're extracting in that way as well. So our preference is always stop it getting there in the first place.
And another interesting question, maybe not so much with your work, but more like general advice. Impressive work. I try to do my part. However, seeing brands like Shein and their success makes me scared of the future. How can we stop feeling so helpless when the world is crazy about consume?
I know it's really difficult. I wish I had the answer. As I said, all we can really do is every time, what I try to live by now is I do try not to buy anything I don't really need. I try to buy from the right brands. I try to repair things, reuse things. There's so many sites out there now as well where we can sell our old clothes and things. There's different ways and buy clothes, vintage and things like this. I think that the good thing is there's all these new initiatives that are popping up, and I think as consumers, at the end of the day, brands that, they're like the Black Friday's coming up, for example. Yeah. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about at work, because actually what we're doing then on the brand directory that I mentioned earlier is promoting brands that are collecting more plastic waste than they're using an extra amount during that holiday. So people are going to buy, people are going to consume. I think we just need to be mindful about it and, just be conscious about who we're purchasing from.
And do you think it needs more regulation in that, and how would that come? Is it like a price tag you put on it, or what's the idea there?
I mean, I think we need systemic change, and regulation, of course, has a really important part on that. I mean, there's a new plastic tax which has just been brought in the UK. That it's early days, but there's some signals that actually that's having an impact. There's other types of regulation, of course, like extended producer responsibility that's being rolled out in lots of countries, where then the producers have to either reduce plastic, obviously, or they fund recovery projects like the one we're doing now. So there's these sorts of things coming in, and that is having a real impact. I mean, we're just starting to work in the Philippines, and they've got a really rigorous EPR process, and they've got a huge plastic pollution problem. And actually then we're starting to see a lot of the big brands that are selling into the Philippines now are funding plastic recovery and looking at reducing footprint. So, I think the important thing, I've talked a lot about what consumers should do and what we need to do, but, it's not our fault. Let's be clear here. It's as consumers, there's things we can do because we want to drive change. And if we all vote with our wallets, brands will listen and action will happen. But it has to come at regulation level and things like that as well.
So, because time's up, you think there's still hope, right?
There's definitely still hope.
Okay, because I was like, yeah.
No, there's definitely
I kind of got
hope.
the same feeling as the person handing in that question, because sometimes it's like you feel helpless, and it's like, well, I know if everyone is doing something, we will get there. But again, it's like the 20-year goal, and it's like, okay. So.
Yeah, there's definitely hope, and I think Germany's actually doing very well when it comes to recycling rates. So it's good to see countries leading the way. And then when you go to India and you see the village that never had, I've seen the before and after, and it's transformational. And the pride that the ladies that are now collecting the waste have in the work that they're doing it can give us all confidence.
Amazing. I think those are like great last words for your talk. Thank you again,
Thank you.
Nikki Stones.
Thank you.